Your stepbrother needs this money more than you, Margaret smirked, tapping her manicured nails against my father's mahogany desk. Besides, William has a real business plan. What do you have? Just a job. I sat across from her in my father's study, the same room where he used to read me bedtime stories. Now, at 32, I was listening to my stepmother justify why she had emptied my inheritance account, the money my biological mother had left for me. I see, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest. And how exactly did you access that account? It was in my name. Margaret's smirk faltered slightly. Your father added me as a custodian years ago. For emergencies, she waved a dismissive hand. William's startup is going to revolutionize the tech industry. He needs capital more than you need a safety net. I thought about the notification I'd received that morning. $2.8 million transferred out of my inheritance, money my mother had saved from her career as a surgeon before cancer took her when I was 12. Dad remarried Margaret 2 years later, bringing 14-year-old William into our lives. Does Dad know about this transfer? I asked, already knowing the answer. He trusts my judgment, Margaret said smoothly, but her eyes flickered away. William has been working on this project for years. It's time someone believed in him. Someone like my father, who was conveniently unreachable in Europe. I stood, smoothing my blazer. Thanks for letting me know. Margaret blinked. That's it, no argument. What's there to argue? The money's already gone. I reached the door, then paused. Just one question. What venture capital firms has William pitched to? He doesn't need to, she said proudly. With this seed money, he can bootstrap the whole thing himself. I nodded, fighting a smile. Good luck with that. As I drove away from my childhood home, I pulled out my phone and made 3 calls. First, to my lawyer, James Chen. Second, to my bank's fraud department. Third, to my assistant at Summit Ventures. Maya, I said when she answered, clear my schedule for next quarter's pitch meetings. I have a feeling something interesting is about to cross our desk. That evening, I reviewed the documents James sent over. Margaret's access to my account had been granted 5 years ago, when my father was in the hospital for heart surgery, a temporary measure. One that should have been revoked once he recovered. It hadn't been. My phone buzzed, a text from William, thanks for being cool about everything. This means a lot. I left it unanswered. Instead, I opened my laptop and started digging. William's LinkedIn listed him as CEO and founder of TechHalt Solutions, but the page was suspiciously vague. His Instagram, full of photos from tech conferences, always posing, never presenting. Classic William, all show, no substance. The next morning, over coffee, James leaned back in his chair. We have a solid fraud case. The problem is, going after Margaret means going after your father too. I stirred my espresso. What if we wait? James frowned. Wait for what? William has to pitch investors eventually. Even $2.8 million won't last long in tech development. I set down my cup. What if we let them make the first mistake? James' expression shifted. You think he'll come to Summit? If he's serious, he'll have to. And as managing partner, I personally review all pitches. James chuckled. That's cold. What if he goes elsewhere? I slid my phone across the table, an email listing every VC firm in a city that had already rejected William's pitch over the last year. He's been trying for months, I said. Summit is probably his last hope before he burns through the stolen money. For the next few weeks, I watched from a distance as William set up his company. He rented expensive office space, hired fresh out-of-college developers, and hyped his revolutionary blockchain solution on social media. Margaret called twice, likely to gloat. I let her go to voicemail. Then 3 months later, Maya buzzed my office. A mess. Ward, your 2 o'clock pitch meeting is here. Tech Vault Solutions. I straightened my mother's car gear watch on my wrist. Send them in. William entered with the confidence of someone who thought they were about to change their life. Focused on his tablet, he started talking before he even looked up. Thank you for taking this meeting. I know Summit Ventures is selective, but I think you'll find our blockchain solution to be. He stopped mid-sentence. The color drained from his face. Hello, William, I said smoothly. Please tell me more about this blockchain solution. His fingers tightened around his tablet. His two young developers shifted awkwardly, sensing tension they didn't understand. Alex, I didn't know you worked here. Managing partner. Actually, I gestured to the chairs. Sit. You came to pitch, didn't you? Trapped, he sat. What followed was the longest hour of William's life. His pitch was exactly what I expected. Buzzwords, empty promises, no actual strategy. His developers tried to add technical details, but William kept talking over them, growing more desperate with each question I asked. I let him sweat. Then finally, I held up a hand. Thank you. Maya will show you out. We'll be in touch. The developers left. William hesitated. Alex, we should talk. About what? The pitch. Or the $2.8 million you stole. He bristled. That money is being put to good use. I glanced at the city skyline. Right? An empty office, a clueless team, and a non-existent product. I met his gaze. I wonder what investors will think when they learn your seed money came from fraud. His face turned red. You wouldn't. It would hurt Dad, too. Try me. I opened the door. Owen William? Summit is passing on your investment opportunity. I suggest you rethink your funding sources before your next pitch. That evening, Margaret called. This time, I answered. What did you do? She snapped. William just called me, completely upset. I reviewed his pitch. I said lightly. Unfortunately, TechVault Solutions doesn't meet our investment criteria. But I'm sure you'll find another use for that $2.8 million. Assuming it hasn't all been spent yet. Silence. Then, Margaret's voice. Lower. What do you want? I smiled. Nothing. But we should have a family meeting. Dad included. Tomorrow at noon. You're bluffing. Try me. I hung up and called James. Phase 2. Are the documents ready? All set. Want me at the meeting? I considered. No. Let's keep this in the family. For now. As I stood on my apartment balcony that night, I traced the face of my mother's watch. She had always told me to be 3 steps ahead. I was. Tomorrow would be interesting. The next morning was crisp and clear. The kind of autumn day my mother would have loved. As I pulled into my father's circular driveway, I spotted William's Tesla parked at an awkward angle, as if he had arrived in a hurry. I stepped out of my car, adjusting the cuffs of my charcoal gray suit. My heels clicked against the limestone path as I approached the front door, but before I could knock, Margaret yanked it open. Her usually flawless makeup was smudged, and her eyes held a desperate edge. This is unnecessary, she whispered harshly. We can handle this privately. I met her gaze with a polite, practiced smile. Good morning to you too, Margaret. Is everyone here? Her lips thinned, but she stepped aside. The house smelled the same. Polished wood, old books, and a faint trace of my father's aftershave. But it felt different. Heavier. As I walked through the familiar hallway, my eyes flickered over the framed photos lining the walls. A silent timeline of our family. After my mother's death, the warmth in those pictures have faded. Staged smiles replaced genuine laughter. Dad was already in his study, seated behind his massive desk like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. William stood by the window, shifting his weight restlessly. Margaret, ever the strategist, had taken her usual position at Dad's right hand. I remained standing, placing my briefcase on the chair in front of me. Alexandra, Dad said, his tone formal. He only used my full name when he wanted to assert authority. Margaret tells me there's been a misunderstanding regarding some funds. I arched an eyebrow. A misunderstanding? Is that what we're calling fraud these days? Margaret inhaled sharply. Now see here. I held up a hand. No, you see here. I opened my briefcase and pulled out 3 neatly prepared folders. I made copies for everyone. Take a moment. Dad adjusted his reading glasses and flipped through the pages. I watched as mild annoyance hardened into something far more serious. His fingers tightened on the documents. Margaret, he said slowly. What is this about temporary access during my surgery? Margaret's face paled. James, it was just a precaution. You know how things were back then. And this transfer, he cut her off, his voice turning steely. 3 months ago, while I was in Europe. Did you authorize this? William needed capital, Margaret said quickly. His business plan is solid, and that money was just sitting there. That money, I interrupted, was my mother's. She worked 60-hour weeks as a surgeon to build that inheritance. She missed birthdays, school plays, and piano recitals to save that money, always promising she'd make it up to me later. I turned to William. But she ran out of laters, didn't she? William swallowed hard. Alex, I didn't know about the temporary access. Mom just said you had agreed. Stop lying. My voice was quiet but sharp. You knew exactly where that money came from. Remember last Christmas? You asked about my inheritance, how it was structured, what kind of access I had. You were fishing for information even then. Dad put the papers down, his face ashen. Margaret, tell me you didn't plan this. Margaret switched tactics. James, everything I did was for our family. William's company is going to be huge. This investment will pay off tenfold. Will it? I pulled out my tablet. Let's review yesterday's pitch meeting. I recorded it, as we do with all potential investments. Want to see how your son plans to spend my mother's money? William's posture stiffened. That's proprietary information. No, I corrected, that's evidence. Just like the bank transfers, the amended account access, and the emails between you and Margaret, planning this entire scheme. That part was a bluff, but the way their faces drained of color told me those emails existed. Dad stood abruptly, his hands pressing into the desk. Enough, Margaret, William, step outside. I need to speak with my daughter alone. But James? No. They hesitated, but one look at him and they obeyed, closing the door behind them. For a long moment, Dad said nothing. Then he exhaled, shakily, rubbing a hand over his face. I've been a fool, haven't I? I didn't answer. Your mother, he murmured. She would be so disappointed. Not just about the money. About everything. About how I let Margaret push me away. I finished for him. Undermine me. Treat me like an outsider in my own home. His wince told me he knew I was right. Alex, I never meet. What you meant doesn't matter, Dad. What you did or didn't do does. I finally sat down, meeting his weary gaze. For years, you let Margaret dictate everything, including how I fit into this family. My graduation, my career, my inheritance. You let her take control of it all. I thought, after your mother died, I thought you needed a woman's guidance. I needed my father. The words hung between us, heavy with years of silence. What do you want to do? He asked at last. I pulled out a final document. This is a repayment agreement. The full amount plus interest repaid in 30 days. If not, we proceed with legal action. Dad flinched. Legal action? Against your own family? I let out a small laugh. Family? I shook my head. Margaret and William stopped being family the moment they stole from me. The only question is, whose side are you on? He picked up the document, reading it carefully. His jaw tightened. 30 days isn't much time. They spent 3 months spending my money. They can figure out how to return it in one. And if they don't? I stood gathering my things. Then I stopped protecting you from the consequences. The bank is already investigating. Margaret's access during your surgery? That could be seen as medical coercion. The timing of the transfer while you were overseas? That suggests premeditation. Dad's eyes darkened. You've thought this through. Mom taught me to be prepared for every possibility. After a long pause, he reached for his phone. Send them back in. Margaret and William re-entered, trying to mask their unease. Dad handed Margaret the document. Sign it, he ordered. Both of you. James, you can't. Sign it, he repeated. Or start packing. William's face reddened. You're choosing her over us? After everything you've what? Dad's voice was ice. Lied about, stolen. I watched as they signed Margaret's hand trembling, William's signature, an angry scrawl. I tucked the papers into my briefcase. 30 days, I reminded them. And William? I suggest finding an office space within your actual budget. As I walked out, I heard Dad's voice behind me. Margaret, we need to discuss your access to my accounts. And William, about your living arrangements. I didn't stay to listen. In my car, I allowed myself a single deep breath. My phone buzzed. Maya, your 3 o'clock pitch is here. Reschedule? No, I replied. I'm on my way. Someone's actual dreams deserve funding today. I started the car, glancing at my mother's watch. The second hand swept forward. 30 days. Let's see what they do with them. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation, and the repayment countdown was ticking. I sat in my Summit Enters office, reviewing the latest updates from my bank's fraud investigation team. Margaret and William had managed to scrape together about $800,000. Most of it from liquidating William's overpriced office lease and selling his Tesla. A drop in the bucket compared to what they owed. Maya buzzed my intercom. A mess. Ward, your father is here. No appointment. I glanced at my mother's watch. 2:15 p.m. Gave me 5 minutes, then sent him in. I spent those 5 minutes centering myself. I hadn't spoken to Dad since that day. He left voicemails, each one more apologetic than the last. But I hadn't returned a single call. When he finally walked in, I barely recognized him. The commanding presence I'd grown up with had faded. He looked smaller somehow, his silver hair unkempt, his usual crisp suit replaced with slacks and a sweater. He hovered near the door, as if unsure whether he belonged. Alexandra, he said. Do you have a moment? I gestured to the chair across from me. What can I do for you, Dad? He sat down heavily, placing a worn leather portfolio on his lap. I've been cleaning. Found some things in the attic I thought you should have. He opened the portfolio, pulling out old drawings, report cards, and photographs. On top was a crayon drawing from 2nd grade, a stick figure in surgical scrubs, labeled Mommy Fixing Hearts. Your mother kept everything, he said softly. After she died, Margaret suggested packing it all away, said it would help us move forward. He shook his head. I should have known better. I picked up the drawing, remembering how proud Mom had been when I gave it to her. She'd hung it in her office at the hospital until... Why are you showing me this now? I asked, my voice steady. Because I owe you an apology, many apologies. He pulled out a small notebook, its pages filled with my mother's handwriting. I found this too. It's her journal from my last few months. My heart clenched. She wrote about you constantly, he continued. Her hopes, her fears, her plans for your future. He placed the journal on my desk, but didn't let go. She knew things might change after she was gone. That's why she structured your inheritance the way she did. To protect me, I said. No, he corrected. To empower you, she wrote that she wanted you to have the freedom to build your own life, without needing anyone's permission, not even mine. I exhaled slowly. Then why did you let Margaret touch the account? His grip on the journal tightened. Because I was weak. After my surgery, I felt vulnerable. Margaret presented herself as the solution, and I let her take control. It was easier than making decisions. And William? His face hardened. Margaret and William are moving out. I'd given them until the end of the month. That caught me off guard. You don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm. This isn't just about the money anymore. It's about trust. Margaret admitted everything after you left. How they planned it for months. How they used my surgery and my business trips to time the transfers. He looked down at his hands. I let it happen. I thought about the remaining $2 million still unpaid and the rest of the money. Margaret's selling her real jewelry, not just the costume pieces she flaunts. And William? Well, he's trying to salvage what's left of his company. But his developers are leaving in droves. I allowed myself a small smile. I might have had my lawyer send them a few key details about potential legal liabilities. Dad sighed. Alexandra, I know I have no right to ask this, but would you consider giving them more time? No. Alex. The deadline stands. I met his gaze. They spent 3 months draining my account and 2 weeks scrambling to fix it. That's more time than they deserved. Actions have consequences. That's something you taught me, remember? He nodded slowly. You sound just like your mother. Good. I picked up the journal, running my fingers over the worn cover. Is there anything else? He stood up, straightening his sweater. Just one thing. Would you have dinner with me next week? Just us. His voice softened. There's a lot I need to say. I hesitated. Dinner would be fine. But Dad, no more excuses. No more enabling. If we're rebuilding this relationship, it starts with the truth. He nodded. I understand. Then, after a pause, your mother would be proud of how you handled this. Not just standing up for yourself, but how precise you were. After he left, I opened the journal with trembling hands. My mother's handwriting filled the pages, medical notes interwoven with personal reflections. I flipped toward the end. My dearest Alexandra, by the time you read this, you'll be grown, making your own way in the world. I set this money aside not as a safety net, but as a foundation for your dreams. Whatever path you choose, remember, success isn't just about reaching your goals. It's about maintaining your integrity along the way. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Don't let anyone take what's rightfully yours. And most importantly, don't let anyone else define your worth. You are my greatest achievement, my brightest legacy. Be bold. Be brave. Be yourself. All my love, Mom. I wiped away a tear before I even realized it had fallen. Maya's voice crackled over the intercom. A mess. Ward, your next appointment is here. Should I reschedule? I straightened my jacket. No, send them in. And Maya? Yes. Clear my schedule next Wednesday. I have dinner plans. Of course. Oh, and that report you asked for. TechVault Solutions assets. What about it? They're liquidating. William's trying to sell the remaining office furniture on Facebook Marketplace. I smirked. Send a copy to Margaret. Just so she knows we're watching. As I prepared for my next meeting, I glanced at my mother's watch. 15 days left. Something told me Margaret and William would need every single one of them. But that wasn't my problem. I had real business to attend to, real entrepreneurs to support, and a dinner with my father to prepare for. Mom was right. Success isn't just about reaching your goals. It's about keeping your integrity along the way. And I intended to do both. The deadline arrived on a crisp November morning. I sat in my Summit Ventures office, reviewing the final tally with James. Over the past 2 weeks, Margaret and William had scrambled to recover what they could, their desperation growing by the day. So, James said, scanning his notes, we received the last wire transfer this morning. Between Margaret's jewelry sales and William's. What was it again? Emergency cryptocurrency liquidation. I supplied, suppressing a smirk. Right. He tapped his pen against the folder. That brings us to $2.75 million. They're still short about $50,000, not counting interest. I glanced at my mother's watch, the same one I'd worn through every major moment of this ordeal. 11 o'clock a.m. They're coming here? James asked. I nodded. They came to me when they wanted money. They can come to me now to face the consequences. At exactly 11, Maya's voice buzzed over the intercom. A mess. Ward, your stepmother and stepbrother are here. Send them in. Margaret entered first, her usual designer polish dulled. William followed, his former startup CEO arrogance stripped away, replaced by something almost like humility. It looked like people who had finally grasped just how badly they had lost. Sit. I instructed, my tone leaving no room for argument. James leaned against the corner of the office, observing. Margaret placed an envelope on my desk. We've brought the final payment. Well, most of it. If we could just have a little more time. The deadline was clear. I interrupted. 30 days. Today is day 30. William exhaled sharply, frustration bleeding into his voice. We sold everything. I'm living in a studio apartment. My company is dead. What more do you want? I tilted my head. What I want is irrelevant. What matters is what you owe. Not just the money, but the trust you shattered, the family bonds you broke because you thought you could take what wasn't yours. Margaret leaned forward. We said we were sorry. What more can we do? I opened my desk drawer and pulled out 3 documents. You have options, I said, sliding the first one forward. Option 1. You signed over Margaret's remaining jewelry collection, including the pieces you stashed at your sister's house. And we call it even. Their stunned expressions confirmed that my private investigator had been worth every penny. Option 2. I continued. You both sign a confession detailing how you planned and executed this theft. I'll keep it on file. And as long as you stay completely out of my life, it stays in my drawer. William swallowed hard. And option 3. I met his gaze. I pressed charges. The bank's fraud investigation is complete, and the police are very interested in the evidence. Margaret turned pale. You wouldn't. Try me. Silence. Then a flurry of hushed whispers between them. Margaret was the first to break. She sat up straighter, shoulders squared. The jewelry. But I want something in writing saying this is over. James handed her the prepared agreement. As they signed, I studied them. Gone were the smug grins, the casual entitlement. They had underestimated me. And now they understood exactly who they had been dealing with. When they left, James collected the documents, shaking his head. You could have. Press charges. We had them. I picked up my mother's journal, running my fingers over its worn cover. Winning isn't always about destroying your enemies, James. Sometimes it's about making sure they know they can never win against you. That evening, I met my father for our now regular Wednesday dinner. I heard about today, he said, as we settled into our usual booth. Margaret called me. And she's moving to Phoenix to live with her sister. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She also asked me to talk to you about the jewelry. Dad. I told her she's lucky that's all she lost. I raised an eyebrow. That's surprisingly firm of you. He took a sip of his coffee. I've been learning from my daughter. He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket. I have something for you. He placed a thick envelope in front of me. Inside was a deed to our old family cabin in the mountains. Mom's cabin. I breathed. Yes, Margaret convinced me to stop using it after your mother died. But it always should have been yours. She loved that place, said it was where she did her best thinking. I traced my fingers over the document, memories of childhood weekends spent hiking, reading by the fireplace, listening to my mother explain the world to me in a way that made everything seem possible. Thank you, I said softly. There's more. He pulled out another set of documents. I'm stepping down as CEO of the company, and I want you to take over. I looked up sharply. Dad, you've proven you have the business acumen, the strategic thinking, and most importantly, the integrity to lead. Just promise me one thing. I exhaled, preparing myself. What? Don't let me off the hook. Keep holding me accountable. Just like your mother would have. A slow smile spread across my face. Deal. That night, I drove up to the cabin. It looked exactly as I remembered. Pine trees swaying in the wind. The porch creaking under my steps. The vast, endless view of the valley below. I sank into my mother's old reading chair, her journal in my lap, her watch on my wrist. Well, Mom, I murmured to the quiet room. I did it. I protected what was mine, and I didn't lose myself in the process. The cabin needed work, new furniture, fresh paint, updates to bring it into the present. But that was okay. I had time. I had resources. And most importantly, I had a clear vision of what I wanted to build. Just like my mother had taught me. The next morning, I had Maya clear my schedule for the weekend. I had a cabin to renovate, a company to prepare for, and a future to shape on my terms. As I drove back to the city, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Dad, breakfast tomorrow? I have some company documents to review. I smiled, thinking of how far we'd come. Me, see you at 9. And Dad, thank you for finally choosing the right side. The sun rose over the mountains, casting golden light through the trees. Somewhere I knew my mother was smiling. Her daughter hadn't just survived, she had won. And this was only the beginning.